October.
Thank you. She helped me.
So today is the last day of the teaching. So just as you have the prayer in Chinese where you say, may I engage in the Bodhisattva practices. So Bodhisattvas are called the children of the victorious ones. So victor here refers to the Buddha having overcome the four negative forces. And so he became enlightened. The Buddha became enlightened through the practice of an independence on Bodhichitta. And then the Buddha also gave teachings on the perfection of wisdom. And the main disciple for these teachings of the perfection of wisdom are the Bodhisattvas, who are dedicated to hold others, cherish others more dearer than themselves. So although we are not compared to the Bodhisattvas and we are poor beings, but we take the Bodhisattvas as our role models and should engage or enter into the Bodhisattva practices. So what that means is entering the Bodhisattva practices or engaging in the Bodhisattva practices means, as the 400 verses say it, yesterday we covered it, first overcome the non-virtues and then first prevent the demeritorious, next prevent, in the middle prevent the idea of the core self, and later prevent views of all kinds. And so we need to avoid indulging in non-virtuous practices from the small practices or very weak ones, and then progress along to overcome the more stronger ones. So in non-meritorious actions means those actions which give rise to suffering in the lower realms and so forth. So while we indulge in the non-virtuous practices, if we say that we are practicing meditating or cultivating bodhicitta or doing tantric practice, that would probably be like a lie. So if you are a sincere practitioner, first you need to refrain from these non-virtuous practices, and then you need to go on with the practices overcoming this grasping at a self, and then in the end prevent views of all kinds, which could mean the overcoming even the imprints left by those of the negative disturbing emotions. And so if you think about the first line here in verse number 190 in the 400 verses, you should avoid deceiving others, telling lie to others, abuse others, and because these are, if you really are sincere about your practice, you should avoid doing these practices. Not only Buddhism, but all of the major religious traditions of the world, not just those who have some kind of a shamanistic practice, worshipping spirits and so forth, but Christianity, religions like Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and so forth. All these major religious traditions of the world do have this practice of preventing or avoiding the demeritorious practices, the non-virtuous practices. As long as a religion emphasizes the practice of love and compassion, they have this practice of avoiding the non-virtuous practices. And not only that, not only the religious followers of these religious traditions, but the more than 1 billion people who are non-believers, they too live in human community, and the more they have friends, they would be happier, and with less, if they have less friends, then they would be happier. So if you create non-virtuous practices, you'll have more enemies, whereas if you serve others, have altruistic concern towards others, you'll have more friends. And therefore, all these religious traditions have the practice of avoiding non-virtuous practices. And then in India, there is this tradition of ahimsa, non-violence, and which also has to do with avoiding non-meritorious practices. So, of course, with regard to the animals, we can't do much or talk much about them avoiding non-virtuous practices and so forth. But as humans, if we try to be hypocrite, if we try to abuse others or bully others and deceive others, tell lie, and so forth, these are not good, non-meritorious practices. Therefore, we should be careful. And not only that you should do so, but if you care, you should also care about your friends and tell them that if you remain practice, if you keep practicing the non-virtuous practices and actions, then you will have less friends and so forth, and less happiness. And therefore, in Buddhism, it is said that the root of all suffering is grasping at some kind of independent, autonomous self. And therefore, there's teaching on how to combat this negative attitude. So in this text, on the 400 verses, there is the practice, there's mention of overcoming pride, like feeling as if you are like a king and so forth. I mean, the king's feeling that they are so big or something like that. So there are different kinds of prides mentioned. So in order for your practice of love and compassion to go successfully, first, you need to be able to see all, even if you are not able, you need to see all sentient beings as equal to you, without letting yourself be overtaken by the pride and arrogance. And because with these, you would be prone to abuse others. And therefore, we need to, whether you are a believer or non-believer, doesn't matter. It seems you need to have some degree of, lessening, less amount of this kind of pride and feeling self-importance. So Holiness was saying, even if you are not able to look at others as more dearer than you should look at others as equal to yourself. And so in the world we have people called heroes, but those heroes actually are or were those who have actually killed many number of peoples. so according to the 400 verses where we covered about pride, I mean, in the process of overcoming our self-grasping may include overcoming this kind of pride. And then there are other graspings at self, which means that you look at the self, which is single, permanent, and autonomous. And then there is also a grasping at a self, which is substantially self-sufficiently existing, where you see the self as something separate from on the one hand, self is something separate from the psychophysical aggregates, ruling over the psychophysical aggregates, and there is another type of this kind of grasping where the self and the aggregates are seen as not separate but still substantially self-sufficiently existing. And so if you understand how the self does not have such a way of existence, then you will know the method of overcoming this kind of grasping. And in both the Pali tradition and the tradition of Buddhism, as well as Sanskrit tradition, both have the teaching on overcoming grasping at self. And particularly in the Sanskrit tradition, there is a great amount of teaching on overcoming this. And then not only overcoming the negative emotions and self-grasping at a self, but even the imprints left by them, which cause you to have some kind of appearance of things, to having some kind of independent existence, and therefore you need to meditate on emptiness coupled with that of Bodhichitta. And therefore, the third line of verse 190 of the 400 verses says, "Let her prevent views of all kinds," referring to this could be a reference to this kind of understanding of emptiness coupled with bodhicitta. And then in the Sanskrit, in the Tantric tradition, not only the subtlest ontological status of things, which is that of emptiness, empty things being absent of any objective independent existence, but there is also the subtle mind that is used to realize the subtlest emptiness. So of course, the mind that we have now in this waking state, for example, can be used to meditate on emptiness, but it also follows those of the sensory perceptions as well. And so if you just So if you are in a way of testing yourself as well, if you are able to do meditation on bodhicitta, meditate on emptiness, it would be helpful for you during waking states to reduce, to have a less intensity of the negative emotions. So it would be helpful in that way. So there are people who are able to actually be aware of dreams as dreams, and therefore we also need to train. Through training, if we are also able to do that, to recognize dreams as dreams, and then within that recognition of dream as dream, when you're able to do that, if you could meditate on bodhicitta, the spirit of enlightenment and emptiness, it would be really powerful. So without employing the coarser levels of consciousness, if you are able to use the subtle state of mind, you will be able to use it to overcome those of the negative emotions. So this is something which is not taught using the subtle mind, the subtle clear light mind in this kind of practice is not taught in Sutrayana but the Tantrayana. And within the Tantrayana there are the 4 sets of Tantrayana, such as the Kriya Yoga, Charya Yoga, Yoga Tantra, and then Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, and Anuttara Yoga Tantra. Let's take tea first, bread and tea. So, an announcement for the Westerners and other foreigners. Tomorrow, day after tomorrow, if you want to have a photo session with His Holiness, not privately, individually, but in groups. We cannot do it individually, but in groups. Please come to the temple area. It's at 7 o'clock day after tomorrow. So please spread this message around so people interested in having this group photo with His Holiness could come. So day after tomorrow, 8th of October, there will be a photo session. If you wish to have a photo session with His Holiness in groups, please come to the temple area downstairs in the debate courtyard by 7 o'clock in the morning, day after tomorrow, the 8th of October. So for a change of the verse number 2 for Bodhichitta ceremony, I've mentioned it earlier. So with regard to this subtlest level of mind, we did talk about the clear light of death, the subtle mind at the time of dying, after the clinical death, which means brain death. So there is a mind which goes subtler and which doesn't depend on a support which is coarse. So the mind is moved towards object by the energy which goes with it. And so just as the mind has its different degrees of subtlety, likewise with this energy which goes with the mind also has the degrees of subtlety. We are not talking about the external air or wind, but an energy or wind energy which is a support for the mind. So regarding body, speech and mind, there are 3 degrees of subtlety: the coarse, this subtle, and then the subtlest. So the body, speech and mind at the Buddha level, at the level of Buddhahood, is the subtlest, the body, speech and mind. And therefore, we need to have a compatible course for those subtle body, speech, and mind of a Buddha. And so, just as we mentioned the three types of conditions mentioned by Master Asanga, the unwavering, the impermanent and potential conditions. Therefore, the qualities of Buddhas and the compounded phenomena, even at the level of Buddhahood, which are subtle, must have their compatible causes, the potential compatible causes. So, of course, there is this clear light, the luminosity awareness within us, although it doesn't become manifest for us. And so the subtlest mind, and which goes together with the subtlest energy, the wind or the prana energy, the subtlest one. These two serve as the substantial cause of the Buddha's mind and Buddha's body, the wind energy serving as the substantial cause of the body of a Buddha, and the clear light mind becomes the substantial mind of a Dharmakaya of a Buddha. And so, in the different practices of the Tantrayana, and especially the highest Yoga Tantrayana, have to do with this subtle wind in the mind. And in the different traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, the Sakyapas talk about Seltong Zinme, which is non-apprehension of the clarity and emptiness. And in the Dzogchen tradition, there's the emphasis on introducing the Rigpa, pristine awareness. And so this awareness, the pristine awareness, is naturally pure. From the beginning, it says that primordially pure nature it has, and its essence is spontaneously arisen, and so forth. And so, in the Dzogchen tradition, there is the practice of introducing to this Rigpa, the pristine awareness, and where the nature with regard to its empty nature, and it is said that you do the analysis of whether there is where it comes from, where it provides, and where it goes, and then get at the ultimate nature of that mind, the emptiness, and then you remain in some kind of a concentration where your mind doesn't move, but then still try to see the basic clarity or luminous nature of the mind itself. And and so, with regard to this, the clear light bliss, clear light of bliss, which is the subjective mind used in Tantrayana for realizing emptiness. This is not taught in the Sutrayana, although emptiness of things and mind is taught in Sutrayana, and therefore Jayang Shepa, Kunkin Jayang Shepa says that when he delineates the difference between Tantrayana and Sutrayana, he makes this difference, and also that the subtlest and the obscuration to knowledge cannot be combated, cannot be overcome by coarser levels of mind, but the subtlest mind, the clear light mind, which is taught in Tantra, and therefore to overcome this obscuration to knowledge, the subtlest obscuration to knowledge cannot be overcome through the Sutra path, but Tantra path. So this one verse that I was quoting earlier from the 400 verses, the verse number 190, and for me it seems to show the entire path to enlightenment, beginning with the very beginner level, ordinary person's practice, up to the highest attainment. But we cannot reach the goal in a few years or months and so forth. But we need to actually be aware of that goal that we seek, that in terms of developing and progressing along the path as referred by the Tatyatha Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhiswaha mantra of Heart Sutra. We need to keep this route that we follow in mind, and then accordingly engage in our practices. So first, today we are going to do the Bodhichitta ceremony, and before that I will do the layperson's vows. Then so that I can leave the explanation of the text later for a later time. I mean, I can do either a long version or give a long commentary or short commentary according to the time. And if the things are tough, I would just skip, not make much commentary. And so, if you are not, or if, especially if I don't know what the text mentions, which kind of philosophical, non-Buddhist philosophical tradition it's actually mentioning. So actually, if we really want to go through this text seriously, we need to be, even though you are Buddhist, you need to be introduced to the position or the assertion of the non-Buddhist traditions saying that there is a soul or Atman. And then we need to see how it is rejected in Buddhism. So one time I had an occasion to meet with non-Buddhist traditions and Jainism, followers of Jainism and so forth. So I asked them, how do you prove that the plants have mind? And so they actually use the reasonings where they use that these plants also have different kinds of memory. So it's not as simple as we find mentioned in our text that the plants sleep at night. Therefore, they have mind. It's not as simple as that. So just as it is said in Pramanavartika by Dharmakirti, if you are actually unaware or you don't know what you need to talk about, and if you don't have the knowledge that you want to share to others, you cannot share it with others. And therefore, since I do not understand much of the non-Buddhist traditions in detail, I cannot explain them in detail here. And so with regard to this verse, 190, first prevent non-meritorious. So for the lay people, lay practitioners, the first step is always, as I said, as this text says, so all human beings need to avoid or refrain from engaging in these negative actions of raping others or stealing others' possessions and lying to others and so forth. So with regard to the vows, in the Pratimoksha tradition, there are the monastic and the layperson's vows. And so within the layperson's vows, there is the upasaka or upasaki for females vows. And then there is the 24-hour vow called nyene, And so regarding this Genyin or the Upasaka vow, the main Upasaka is the Upasaka who remains celibate. And then the next is the Upasaka with the 5 precepts, which include, which are, the 5 precepts are not killing some human beings, and then not stealing, avoiding stealing things from others, and then sexual misconduct or non-chastity, and then telling a grave kind of lie. I mean, for ordinary people, there's no risk for you to commit this kind of grave lie. But someone has sitting on a throne and giving teaching to others, they might feel that they are Kempos or abbots and so forth, and they are the ones who are giving this vow, and therefore feeling, I mean, some kind of having some kind of self-importance. And then for lay people, the one thing that that is a little bit difficult for you to give up is maybe drinking alcohol. So if possible, please, you should give up drinking. If not, even if you're not able to give up drinking, you should still try not to drink to the point of getting drunk. So in the 1960s, my abbot or master of ordination, Bhikkhu ordination, Gyabjeling Rinpoche, told me this story that one Tibetan old man took these 5 vows from him, and when he actually explained these precepts, this man, and came to the explanation of the not drinking alcohol, this man said, "I cannot give up drinking alcohol." And then Yongdzin Ling Rinpoche very kindly told him, doesn't matter, I mean, in that case, don't drink too much to the point of getting drunk. And so, if you, and I would also say that if you could give up or drinking alcohol, then completely you should do so. But if not, then don't drink to the point of getting drunk. So these 5 precepts regarding them. So with regards to the ultimate cessation, it is that state where you have overcome or restrained yourself from all kinds of negative vitties. And then this starts with the avoidance of the physical and verbal negative actions, and then the second level, you put effort in overcoming the negative emotions, and then after that comes that of the third level, which is overcoming even the imprints of these negative emotions. And so, for those of the lay people who wish to take the Upasaka or Upasaki for female vows, please, if you have space, make 3 prostrations to the Buddha, viewing the statue of the Buddha as Buddha himself in person here. So if you have space, get up and make prostration. If you don't have space and make prostrations physically, but getting up and bending down, but touch your 3 places, your crown with your folded hands, your crown, throat and heart. 3 times, please. Make 3 prostrations to the Buddha, and imagining him to be here in person. And then please make 3 prostrations to me, who is your upadhyayas at this point for this layperson's vows. So I am like a messenger of the Buddha here. Please kneel on your right knee or crouch. If you have bad knees or bad legs, it's you are exception. You have an exception here. Otherwise, kneel on your right knee. So whatever vows you take, in this case Buddhism, or even in other religious traditions maybe, whatever vows they may take, they must be also basing it on the sense of giving themselves into their own God or the higher power. So similarly here, in our case as Buddhists, we need to take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, as the basis for our taking this vow of lay people, of a layperson. So by having taken refuge in the three jewels, of which the Dharma jewel consists of the true cessation. So beginning with the level where you have overcome, where you have attained the true cessation first time, and up to that level where you have overcome, where you could overcome the negative, all the negative emotions, and reach the liberation, and also think of overcoming even the imprints of those negative emotions, the obscuration to knowledge. And so with this in mind, with this aspiration to reach these aspirations, take refuge in the three jewels, the purpose of which is to reach this, to nirvana, not just thinking that you could have, that you may have more wealth and long life in this life, and that there may be no obstacles to your near and dear ones and so forth, because these are minor objectives. So if you are able to attain the state of nirvana or liberation, where you have overcome all the negative emotions, then you could also be of service to a certain degree to others, for others. So from this time on, until my death, you make this pledge that you will keep these 5 precepts, which I have explained. So please repeat. I'll say in Tibetan, but you should repeat in. So usually the Chinese friends are not able to pronounce their ra correctly. So when they are told, when they say se ra gompa, they say se la instead of se ra. The Chinese officials in Tibet in those days. So keep them in, although you may be repeating after me in Tibetan, but you keep this in mind, meaning Master, please pay attention to me. I, known by this name, say your name here. From this time on, and as long as I'm alive, seek refuge in the Buddhas, the best of the bipeds. I seek refuge in the Dharma, the best of freedom from attachment. I seek refuge in the Sangha, the best of congregations. Master, please consider me as an upasaka or upasaki for female until my death. Master, please pay attention to me. I, known by this name, see your name here? From this time on, and as long as I'm alive, seek refuge in the Buddhas, the best of the bipeds. I seek refuge in the Dharma, the best of freedom from attachment. I seek refuge in the Sangha, the best of the congregations. Master, please consider me as an upasaka or upasaki until my death. Then at the end of the third repetition, when you say, consider me as an upasaka or upasaki for female, feel convinced that you have become a layperson with vows, upasaka or upasaki, keeping these 5 precepts, or if you're not able to keep all, if you think that you can't keep all the 5, at least you should determine what number of vows you may be able to keep, and accordingly feel convinced that you have received this vow of keeping these number of vows. 1, 2, or most of them, or some of them. So you decide yourself what number of vows you wish to keep out of the 5 or all 5. So when you say, consider me as an upasaka or upasaki, at that point I'll snap my fingers and feel convinced that you have received the vows. Master, please pay attention to me. I known by this name from this time on, as long as I'm alive, seek refuge in the Buddha as the best of the bipeds. I seek refuge in the Dharma, the best of freedom from attachment. I seek refuge in the Sangha, the best of the congregations. Master, please consider me as an upasaka until my death. Please sit down. So although we ideally we need to repeat these precepts as well, but we don't need to do it here. And so regarding these 5 precepts, killing human beings and lying and stealing others' possessions and again telling a grave lie, as well as then sexual non-chastity, and then giving up the alcohol. So just as the past Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as well as the Arahats have taken these vows and kept them and observed them purely, likewise you should make this determination and pledge that you will do so, that you have taken these vows and that you will observe them purely. So make that determination. So with this, we are done with the layperson's vows. Next is the Bodhichitta ceremony, which is to say the generating the aspiring Bodhichitta through the ritual. So with regard to the Bodhisattva vows, there are those of the 18 root downfalls and 46 secondary infractions. So those of you who think that you may be able to keep all the Bodhisattva vows, so you could actually think that you also take the Bodhisattva vows after having followed this ceremony for generating the aspiring Bodhichitta. But although the ritual itself is for the aspiring Bodhichitta, so please imagine the Buddha himself in person to be here in this temple. So the teaching of dependent origination is something that is unique to the Buddha's teaching. In the past it was the case, and today, even today, it is so. And so you imagine the Buddha in person here, and around imagine him to be surrounded by his great successors to his of the Buddha, such as Mahakashyapa and so forth, Ananda and the others. And then also the 8 close Bodhisattva disciples in the state of as deities, for example, which includes Avalokiteshvara, as you find mentioned in the Heart Sutra, from the dialogue between Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra. And then there are in the scriptures also the dialogue between the Buddha and the disciples like Manjushri and so forth. And so please imagine them, these bodhisattvas. And also imagine Aryadeva, the noble lady Aryadeva. I will give you the transmission of the mantra of Aryadeva, green Tara in this case, and also masters like Nagarjuna and his disciples, whose texts, writings are accessible to us even today. And so, to study them, so the masters like Nagarjuna's disciples include Aryadeva, Buddhapalita, Bhaviveka, Chandrakirti, and then also those of Shantideva and Vimuktisena, Shantarakshita, Haribhadra and so forth. And then the masters of epistemology such as Dignaga and Dharmakirti. And then the masters of Vinaya, Gunaprabha and Shakyaprabha and so forth. So all these great masters. And then the masters of Tibet as well as the China such as Tangsen Lama, who brought the teaching of Buddhism from India to China, and particularly the lineage of the Nalanda tradition. And so those lamas, or the masters who brought Buddhism from India to China, as well as the masters like Chandrakshita and his disciples, the 8 main disciples and so forth in the Nyingma tradition, and then the Kadam tradition, and in the Sakya tradition. And the Kagyu, and then the new Kadam tradition, the revived Kadam tradition, from which started with those of the Master Tsongkhapa and his disciples, and then the Chonang masters of the Chonang tradition, whose main practice is emphasizing is that of the Kala Chakra. And so imagine all these masters of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions as well in the space. And so when you So if you are taking the Bodhisattva vows, these masters, beginning with the Buddha and those of the successors and so forth, down to the Tibetan masters, become the objects of from whom you, the beings from whom you take these Bodhisattva vows, and for the aspiring Bodhichitta, you actually take them as your witness. And so today, the Buddha, together with all this retinue around him, just as they have generated bodhicitta and engaged in their practices and so forth, likewise, I will sincerely follow in their footsteps. And the Buddha is said to have first generated bodhicitta. So in his previous lives, there were many instances when the Buddha generated his bodhicitta within himself, and so we should also make it such a point, make the point that we are able to be on the onset of the path to leading to enlightenment. So with starting from today until death, you should use these stanzas to remind yourself of Bodhichitta and familiarize yourself with Bodhichitta. And so taking the Buddha together with the Bodhisattvas and all these masters as witness, in order to become a Buddha, of course, to be able to generate bodhicitta, one should also have the support of the seven, the merit, and therefore you should the seven in practice. If you have the text, please say. Text the king. So this seventh prayer is from the Samandabhadra prayer. So you've done this seventh in practice. Which comprise making offering, making prostration, offering, and then confessing your misdeeds, and then rejoicing in the deeds, good deeds of others, and requesting the Buddhas not to pass away, but give teachings, and then dedicating all this for this attainment of Buddhahood. So if you have all the different parts of the engines and so forth of a vehicle, you can drive it, otherwise not. And so with this seven limb practice, through this what you do is accumulation of merit and purification of negativities. And then there's also the third factor of called intensifying or increasing these practices further, and so this should be done on a daily basis. So usually we have different texts that we use for the aspiring bodhicitta ceremony. So as I mentioned yesterday, these 3 verses from the precious garland of Master Nagarjuna, these we are going to use these, which are powerful lines. So if you could, it is said that if you could recite these 3 verses on a daily basis, it would be very good. So before doing the ceremony, we need to actually have a clear idea of what we are going to do. So bodhicitta is that aspiration for the sake of others, where you aspire to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So aspiration to lead and help others becomes the cause, and then the aspiration to reach Buddhahood becomes, is simultaneous with the bodhicitta itself. So in order to recognize Buddha, the enlightenment, you need to understand the state of purification of negativities. And also for that you need to understand the basic nature of mind being clear light or luminosity. And that you need to understand that things do not have any objective true existence which is grasped at by our ignorance. And therefore, understanding the teaching of the second and third turning of the wheel of Dharma, you need to actually feel convinced that, this enlightenment is something possible to attain. And when you talk about helping others or serving others, you're not just thinking only of overcoming overcoming sickness or poverty and so forth. So through these practices of giving material help will not help to overcome the negative emotions as such, as we know from our own experience that so in order to the interest of others or goals that you aspire to is that of the liberation for others. And so while you remain ignorant about the path, you cannot actually show the path to others, and the path of liberation and omniscient state to others. And therefore, you need to be knowledgeable about the principles of method and wisdom, the path that leads to liberation and omniscience. And then, in order to be able to serve others effortlessly, you need to know their dispositions, and without knowing which, you cannot teach according to their needs and what is suitable to them and so forth. And therefore, bodhisattvas also aspire to become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, in order to be able to help others infinitely and effectively according to the needs, in accordance with the needs of others. And therefore, you aspire to your own enlightenment, reach that goal of enlightenment for yourself, which is in turn for the benefit of others. Your goal is to help others, and therefore, the more you are apt at the more you have the experience of these paths and so forth, the more you will be able to help others. And so you should generate bodhicitta, and then with the help of that, by understanding that the negative emotions and these the stains or the imprints left by them are also something possible to be overcome, and you will be able to have a genuine sense of how you can actually help others and how you can reach that of enlightenment for the sake of others. Otherwise, you may be able to help others partially but not fully, without knowing their dispositions. So you just by reciting the verse for taking refuge in Bodhichitta, which says, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the Supreme Assembly until I'm enlightened, and so forth, will not be enough for you to generate Bodhichitta as such. Mere understanding of Bodhichitta will not also give rise to Bodhichitta within yourself, but in order to train for Bodhichitta, it comes down to as the compassion, as Master Nagarjuna says. The root of these is compassion. And so in order to have this great compassion, which actually feels, with which you actually think of taking responsibility over onto your shoulder, so you need to understand the suffering nature of sentient beings, and in order to be able to have compassion within yourself, develop compassion genuinely, you need to be able to hold sentient beings dear to your heart and cherish them. So there are two different systems of generating bodhicitta. Of course, the main thrust is same, but there's they are slightly different. Those of the 7 points instruction of cause and effect, which includes recognizing others to be to have been one's mother, and remembering their kindness, wanting to repay their kindness, and then thinking about the cherishing the sentient beings, and then thinking about the faults of cherishing oneself, and the advantage of cherishing others, and then you think of equaling and exchanging self and others, and then generate bodhicitta. And so these two systems combined together, we have this kind of method of generating bodhicitta. So the system of cultivating bodhicitta through equaling and exchanging self and others is much more powerful. And so cherishing others is something, therefore, becomes your soul refuge, sort of the embodiment of all the refuges. So both the systems help us to develop the sevenfold system, and the equaling and exchanging self and others help us to develop this the sense of cherishing and holding others dear to your heart. So through these practice, you need to develop the sense of cherishing and holding others dear to your heart. So both yourself and others do not want suffering. It's you are same in this sense. So neither yourself nor others want suffering, and you, just as you want happiness, and you don't think of wanting happiness just because you are kind to yourself, but you we talk about selflessness, but the selflessness doesn't mean that the conventional self does not exist as well. And therefore we have this notion or sense of a self, an I, and therefore we also have the experience of pain and pleasure. And so we want happiness and want to avoid suffering for ourselves. And so similarly, if you think about others, whether someone is helpful to you or beneficial to you or not, or harmful to you, someone causing harm to you, they also are same in not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. So they instinctively want happiness, not suffering, and then they also have the right to achieve this goal. And therefore, all sentient beings across the expanse of space want happiness and not want suffering, and therefore we need to work for this goal for others. And then, secondly, if we talk about business, 1 rupee and 100 rupees, which one is more valuable? 100, of course. And so, when you think about only yourself, you are just a single individual. When you think about others, it's infinite. And today we are talking about democracy, where the public and people are considered more important. And so, comparing yourself with others, the others are countless, infinite, and therefore they are more important. You are just one. And if you think about the reality, the more you are concerned about others' well-being and think of bringing benefit to them, your own goal will be achieved as a byproduct. As Master Maitreya says in his prayer, I prostrate to Bodhichitta, which avoids the path to lower migrations and leads to higher migration, transmigration, and leads to this state of immortality. So, if with selfish motive, when you try to restrain yourself, or refrain from indulging in the negative emotions, and on the other hand, if you do this practice of restraining the negative actions with the sense of helping others, not harming others, thinking that you should not harm them and hold them dear, these practices of the 10 non-virtuous actions also come along within this practice of bodhicitta. And so you reach the state of immortality, which refers to liberation. So the bodhisattvas don't think of reaching liberation for themselves alone, but they think of others, and therefore they are able to overcome the negative emotions as well as their imprints left by them, and therefore as a liberation comes as a byproduct for them. Because they meditate or cultivate the wisdom of emptiness with a view to help all other sentient beings. And therefore, bodhicitta leads one away from or avoids the transmigration to the lower realms and leads one to the higher realms, and then it leads you to liberation. And so if you want to have a peace of mind, stay comfortably relaxed, and without problem, you should cultivate bodhicitta. So the people who think, if you look at your neighbors, you'll see that the more selfish they are, the more problem they have. If you look, you'll see, even amongst your neighbors, that the more altruistic and more less selfish they are, the happier, the families are happier. So do you agree with me? So bodhicitta is, or the altruism, the altruistic attitude is the root of all our joy and happiness, pleasure. If you look at even animals like dogs, you'll see the more friendly a dog is with its with the other dogs, the happier they are. Whereas a dog which is more angry, always growling at others, it will not have friends. So that's a loss for the dog. And so as human beings, we have this human intelligence, we have our own unique language, and we are able to understand others. Therefore, we need to use this intelligence to develop love and compassion towards others. This is not only saying that others will be happy or something like that, but you will be happy. So if you think of along these lines, you naturally love yourself, and you want something good to happen to yourself. And if that is the case, then you should not help others. If you could, you can help others. If you can't help others, at least don't harm others. And you will be happy, you'll be healthy physically, and so forth. You may say that you are doing some practice for longevity, but if you are full of negative emotions like attachment, anger, and so forth, there's no way you can live long. Longevity does not come merely through mantras, but peace of mind. And the more altruistic you are, more caring you are for others' well-being, you will have greater peace of mind. And so, as I told you the other days, the scientists say that the calmer you are within, the more compassionate you are, then you are happier. So some friends I have met in the recent years have told me that since we didn't meet for some time, you look younger than your age. And so what's the secret, they ask me. So I tell them that I don't want this to share this because it's my secret. And so I don't take any special medicine for my health. So, but why this happens is I do get up early morning. As a bhikshu, I don't take meals after lunch. And so in the evening, I take some tea, and then I go to sleep. So one secret is that I sleep for 8 to 9 hours each night. And then the most important thing is I develop bodhicitta within, think of bodhicitta. Just as I get up, I wake up, I say the prayer, a praise to the Buddha, and then think of his teaching, reflect on his teaching. And so in this way, I actually set my mind up for the whole day. And so it helps. And then meditation on emptiness, through that, the illusion-like nature of things also comes, I could see. And so this helps to reduce the negative emotions such as anger and hatred, and therefore there is peace of mind and happiness. And so I have no other secret but sleeping long hours in each night, and also having this kind of altruistic attitude towards others. So for you also it will be the same. The new monks who took the novice monk ordination, and also the bhikshu ordination from me, monks and nuns. So if you you are young now, and if you want to stay young and look young and in the years to come, you should also have this altruistic attitude towards others. So this is something amazing. As Shantideva says in the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, it is true. This is the medicine for immortality. So it is a supreme elixir that overcomes the lot of death. It is the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty in the world. It is also the supreme medicine that cures the world's disease. It is the evergreen tree that shelters all beings wandering tired on the roads of life. It is the universal bridge that frees beings from wretched lives. It is the rising moon of mind that dispels the torment of addictions. It is the sun that burns away the mighty ignorance of the world. It is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of the Dharma, and so forth. So when we do the ritual for long life initiation, there's mention of the Lord of Death taking away our lifespan and so forth, and our merits and so forth. Actually, if you are dedicated and for the well-being of others solely, and then you will not mind, even if others may snatch away your lifespan and so forth, and your merits and so forth. And so the Buddha has given so much teaching on bodhicitta and also the wisdom of emptiness. And then also we have these writings of masters of Nagarjuna and so forth. And so if we don't put effort in cultivating these principles within ourselves now in this life itself as humans, when do we do it then? So we have the access to these great writings of the great masters of India and others, and therefore we need to think that feel determined to make this life meaningful. How do we do that? By generating the bodhicitta, the aspiring bodhicitta, not only making this life meaningful, but if you could leave an imprint in this life for this kind of practice, throughout your next life you may be able to meet with the Dharma, and then training through the path, you may be able to reach that of the Buddhahood and the Buddhahood. And so, with the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas and all these great masters around him in our imagination here, visualization, think of taking this, generating the bodhicitta. So please kneel on your right knee. So, as I was telling you earlier, the Tibetan text has a mistake. So in the Tibetan text that you have, there is in the third line, instead of saying semchen, which means sentient beings, the text that is on the green page says sangye, which is Buddha. So the person, whoever wrote that, is an indication that the person has no understanding of the Dharma. And so I am a follower of the Buddha, a bhikshu, and I can say that I am a follower who follows the teaching of the Buddha based on reason and understanding, having understood his teaching. So I serve here as a messenger of the Buddha. So from the depth of your heart, feel the meaning of these lines, not just empty words, saying empty words, but just as these lines say, try to feel them within yourself so that you actually mix your mind with the meaning of these lines. So if you already, through your daily practice, if you already have this wish to become enlightened for the sake of sentient beings, all sentient beings, you should intensify that wish and determination. And even if you have not been doing this practice on a daily basis, while going through these lines, have built up this determination to work for the sentient beings, and for that to reach Buddhahood for the benefit of all others. And you actually think of having this determination, keeping this determination, and also make the pledge to keep this altruistic attitude of spirit of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So not only should you generate or cultivate, generate bodhicitta here, but having done that, make this pledge to keep it. And then those of you who are able to think that you will be, you could actually engage in the bodhisattva practices, you should make that determination to also to keep to engage in the bodhisattva practices. Please repeat these lines. Recite it. May I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish and without interference, as are the earth, water, fire, wind, herbs, and wild forests. May sentient beings be as dear to me as my own life, and may they be dearer to me than myself. May their ill deeds bear fruit for me, and may all my virtues bear fruit for them. As long as any sentient being anywhere has not been liberated, may I remain for the sake of that being, though I have attained highest enlightenment. Say it 3 times. May I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish and without interference, as are the earth, water, fire, wind, herbs, and wild forest. May sentient beings be as dear to me as my own life, and may they be dearer to me than myself. May their ill deeds bear fruit upon me, and may all my virtues bear fruit upon them. As long as any sentient being anywhere has not been liberated, may I remain in the world for the sake of that being, though I have attained highest enlightenment. May I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish and without interference, are as are the earth, water, fire, wind, herbs, and wild forest. May sentient beings be as dear to me as my own life, and may they dearer to me than myself. May their ill deeds bear fruit upon myself, and may all my virtues bear fruit upon them. As long as any sentient being anywhere has not been liberated, may I remain in the world for the sake of that being, though I have attained highest enlightenment. So as it is said in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, where it says, today my life has borne fruit, and have obtained this human life. And so these are the same. And so Master Nagarjuna says these lines that you have just recited, and he is not someone who would lie to us about such an altruistic attitude. And so he says these lines, writes these lines in the precious garland, and you should also recall these lines. Having generated bodhicitta now through this ceremony, you should remind yourself of this bodhicitta on a daily basis. So from this time on until my death, as it is said in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, thus whatever actions I may do from now on must be in accord with the family tradition. Never shall I do anything to disgrace this holy, faultless family lineage. Please sit down. So with this, we are done with the Bodhisattva, the Bodhicitta ceremony, which is to say that we have generated the aspiring Bodhicitta. Although we may not have changed clothes, we may be in the same robes of monks and robes, for example, the monks and nuns' robes, but internally we have actually transformed our attitude. So far, what we have done is held self-cherishing attitude more important, cherished oneself more important than others. and disregarded others' well-being. But from now, what you have actually done is you have begun to see others more dearer and valuable than oneself. So seeing this as the source of all excellent qualities, you should engage in the practices whereby you hold others dearer than yourself and more cherish them over oneself. So mainly what you need to do is curb or restrain the self-cherishing attitude, self-centeredness. So if you are able to do that, well, then you'll be able to avoid causing infraction to the Bodhisattva vows as well. So do this, generate Bodhichitta and taking Bodhisattva vows. When I'm able to do this, I feel that I have been able to make this human life a meaningful one, and it has served the purpose of being a human. So to this time also, I feel the same. So if you could say the seven-limb practice on a daily basis, that would be good. But even if not, just as you have generated, and even if you are not able to do the seven-limb practice, you should still go over these three verses, not just 3 times, but until you really are able to have some feeling for this altruistic intention or the spirit of enlightenment, bodhicitta. So I also have thought of doing some transmissions of some mantras, as you have already imagined the Buddha Shakyamuni in person. Imagine from his heart emerges the Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Swaha mantra from his heart, and imagine this coming down to you and dissolving within you. Dissolving into yourself, and thereby think of receiving blessings. Om Muni Muni, please repeat. Om Muni Muni Mahamunaya Swaha. Om Muni Muni Mahamunaya Swaha. Om Muni Muni Mahamunaya Swaha. And then amongst the 8 close disciples, Bodhisattva disciples, there is Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is the embodiment of all the compassion of all the Buddhas, the great compassion of all the Buddhas. So this compassion is the root of our cultivation of bodhicitta, and therefore with this compassion, if you are able to, with this in mind and understanding of it, then if you recite mantra Avalokiteshvara, it will be helpful. Please repeat this. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. And next, Manjushri, who is the embodiment of all the wisdom of all the Buddhas. So in order for you to develop your wisdom on understanding the reality of things, then doing practice on Manjushri and reciting his mantra would be helpful. And so in Tibetan tradition, we have the study of logic and in dialectical debate. So for such studies, it's if you could do the practice on Manjushri, visualizing Manjushri and also reciting his mantra, it will be helpful to develop wisdom as well. as a catalyst. Om Arapatanadi, please repeat. Om Arapatanadi, Om Arapatanadi, Om Arapatanadi. Next, instead of Vajrapani, I'll do the mantra of Aryadeva, who is the deity of the enlightened deeds of the Buddhas. So in the Guhyasamaja, according to Guhyasamaja Tantra, Tara is the purified nature of our prana energy. So the purified nature of this prana arising in the form of a deity is Aryadeva. So please repeat this mantra of Aryadeva. Om Tare Tutare Ture Swaha. Om Tare Tutare Ture Swaha. Om Tare Tutare Ture Swaha. So this is just to leave some imprint for the sacred mantra Vajrayana. So you're not in a hurry to do a tantric practice yet, as I have made this distinction between the general and the structure of the teaching of the Buddha and the teachings which are specifically tailored for certain beings. So if your practice of the Sutrayana with regard to the Bodhichitta, practice of Bodhichitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness and so forth goes well, then your tantric practice will be effective as well. So otherwise, emphasizing too much on Tantrayana, some people have called the Tibetan Buddhism Lamaism, because people do practice of based on some kind of deities, and then the lineage lamas of the tantras, and then forgetting the great masters like Nagarjuna. Of course, he is related to Guhyasamaja and the Hairuka tantras, but these masters are somehow forgotten, and we have regarded the lineage lamas to be important in tantra, and therefore, and so Trishul Rinpoche was a master who was very good, and he is someone from whom I have received many Nyingma teachings, and so Rinpoche took Guhyasamaja initiation from me, and then he told me that when he was back in Nepal, and he thought of doing some retreat or approximation retreat on Guhyasamaja Tantra, and then he sent some of his disciples to get some text to do a retreat on Guhyasamaja Tantra. And so when these disciples went to some Gelug monasteries, and then these Gelug monastery monks told the disciples of Trishul Rinpoche that no, they didn't have the text. And then the disciples, the Gelug monks were asked, isn't Guhyasamaja one of the main practice of Guhyasamaja? And these Gelug monks have told Trishul Rinpoche's disciples that no, our main practice is Vajrayogini. So in the writings, amongst the writings of Tsongkhapa, there are 4 or 5 volumes on Guhyasamaja Tantra itself. But this Gelug monastery, the monks of this Gelug monastery in Nepal told the Nyingma monks that the Guhyasamaja is not. And then there is Sakya saying that the Nenjoma has been taken away from us by the Gelugpas, but we need now to take care of the Mahakala, Kur and Shell. So, because of such things that we do, such mistakes that we have made in terms of preserving our tradition, I mean, our tradition is called Lamaism. So, if you are able to, I mean, in each of the traditions, for example, if you are able to practice the 9 yanas, the 9 vehicles that are mentioned in the Nyingma tradition, I mean, then you will be able to actually understand the entire teaching of the Buddha for someone who is practicing Dzogchen. I mean, otherwise, without really understanding the practice of the Four Noble Truths and so forth, I mean, if you say that while saying that you are a Nyingma practitioner, I mean, if you say that you are doing some breakthrough meditation of like the texture and so forth, it will not be so effective. And then for the Sakyapas, without really having the basic practices at the foundation, if they say that they are doing some kind of Hey Vajratantra practice and so forth, I mean, it may not be so effective as well. And then with the Kagyu tradition also, while saying they're doing some practice that comes in the Mahamudra tradition, but not understanding the great, the fundamental practices, they won't be so effective. Otherwise, what happens if you don't really have the understanding of the basic structure of the teaching of the Buddha and the foundational practices, I mean, you will not be aware of the great masters of India like Nagarjuna and so forth, but only focus on your own lineage masters, the Tibetans, and therefore you will make mistakes like that. So if you are able to understand the general structure of the teaching, and all these teachings written by the Indian masters, which are contained in what we call the 18 classic texts or the 13 classic works and so forth. So having the basic, I mean, the foundational understanding of the foundational teachings well, then when you do that, add on to that your practice, the Tantric practices, and then the different traditions within each of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions will also make sense. Such as in the Sakya, you have the Satya, Ngorpa, and Tsarpa, and then in the Kagyu, the 4 major and 8 minor lineages, and then in the Gelug tradition, for example, we have the Segyu and Sanyingyu and so forth. So if you look at the general structure of if you could look at the general structure. All of them come from the Nalanda. So if you go back to the root, it comes from Nalanda. And so you'll see that all the Tibetan Buddhist traditions have the same source and the root. And these texts that we study, the Sutrayana texts, are also common to all traditions. Otherwise, we kind of say that we are Gelugpas or Sakyapas, Nyingmapas, and so forth. And through that, what happens is kind of discrimination. We create negative karma in relation to the dharma itself. That's not good. So even amongst the other people of other countries like Taiwan or Western countries like Europe and so forth, although the situation has changed these days, in the past there were people, even Westerners, who say that they were followers of this tradition or that tradition. One time when I was in Europe, okay, I'm saying too much, I'll leave it. Guba. Guba. So we're on chapter 9. So the half of the text is finished and half remaining. So verse number 201, all are produced for their effect, thus none are permanent. There are no Tathagatas other than subduers who recognize things as they are. So what actually has effect on us, influence us, is these compounded phenomena around us. And therefore, since they have causes and conditions, so sometimes the word takpa, the permanent here, has the meaning of something like immutable, unchanging. So here it could have the connotation of something which exists permanently without changing, that they have no that they don't depend on any other factor. So the meaning here, thus none are permanent, has the meaning of not having any objective independent existence, and therefore, with regard to the reality of how things are, the Tathagatas or the Buddhas are able to see it and thereby teach it to others. There are no Tathagatas other than subduers who recognize things as they are. Next verse, there is not anywhere anything that ever exists without depending, thus never is there anywhere anything that is permanent. And so this refutes that there is a self which is permanent. And the next verse, there is no functional thing without a cause, nor anything permanent which has a cause. Thus the one who knows suchness said, what has come about causelessly does not exist. Next verse. If the unproduced is permanent, because impermanent things are seen to be product, seeing that the produced exists would make the permanent non-exist. And then the next verse, that the space and so forth are permanent is a conception of common beings. For the wise, they are not objects perceived even by conventional valid cognition. And so verse number 270 refutes the permanent time. Since it exists, functional things are seen to start and stop. It is governed by the other factors. Thus, it is also an effect. Any cause without any effect has no existence as a cause. Therefore, it follows that causes must be effects. When a cause undergone change, it undergoes change. It becomes the cause of something else. So a thing with a permanent cause is produced by that which has not come into being. Whatever happens by itself cannot have a cause. How can that which is produced by a permanent thing is impermanent? Never are the two, cause and effect, seen to have incompatible characteristics. And then next is the refutation of the permanence in particles, that of which some sides are causes, while other sides are not, is thereby multifarious. How can that which is multifarious be permanent? So the cause which is spherical is not present in the effect, thus complete interpretation of particles is not feasible. So one particle's position is not asserted as also that of another. Thus, it is not asserted that cause and effect are the same sides. So next verse is a reference to having six different particles on the same 6 sides of a single particle in the middle. Whatever has an eastern side also has an eastern part. So as long as there is some movement you talk about in the case of a particle, there must be 2 sides at least, however small it may be. There must be 2 sides, one in front and one other. Otherwise you can't talk of moving from one direction to the other. Those whose particles have sides admit that they are not partless particles. The front takes up, the back relinquishes. Whatever does not have both of these motions is not something which moves. That which does not have a front nor any middle and which does not have a rear, being invisible, who will see it? And the next verse 220 is a refutation of the liberation being a substantial phenomena. This is refuting our own with systems within the Buddhist system itself. So if liberation, which is other than what binds, is bound and the means existed, it should not be called liberation, since nothing is produced from it. In Nirvana there are no aggregates and there cannot be a person. What Nirvana is therefore one who is not seen in Nirvana. And next is refutation of the Sankhya philosophical assertion. When free from attachment, at liberation, what good is the existence of consciousness? So Sankhya say that when all these they evolve, dissolve back into the basic primal factor, then that is the liberation. Also, to exist without consciousness is clearly the same as are not existing. If at liberation itself existed, there could be a seed of consciousness. Without it, there is no speculation with regard to worldly existence. It is certain that those liberated from suffering have no other self. Therefore, the end of self should always be affirmed as good. The conventional is preferable, but the ultimate never is. Ordinary people have some belief in this, but none in the ultimate. So the conventional things are something that we can experience, but the ultimate is something that we cannot. So that's the complete the end of the 9th chapter. Next is the refutation of misperception of the self. The first is refutation of the Vaisheshika system. Now, verse 226. When the inner self is not female, male or neuter, it is only out of ignorance that you think your own self male. So this has to do with the fact that when you talk about a self, it cannot be posited without relation to the psychophysical aggregates. And then the next verse, when all the elements are not male, female, neuter, how is it that depends on them, male, female or neuter? Yourself is not myself, thus there is no such self, since it is not ascertained. Does the conception not arise in relation to impermanent things? From one rebirth to another, the person changes his like the body. It is illogical for yours to be separate from the body and permanent. Intangible things do not produce so-called motivity. Thus, the life force is not agent of the body's movements. From verse number 235 is the refutation of the Sankhya's school. So priest lead through. If consciousness is permanent, an agent is superfluous. It is permanent. Fuel is unnecessary. And verse number 38 down is a refutation of the Nyayikas, of the non-Buddhist school. Merely a small part with mind is conscious, but a person is as vast as space. Therefore, it would seem as though its nature is not to be conscious, and so forth. If the self is in everyone, then why does another not think of this one as I? It is unacceptable to say that it is obscured by itself. There is no difference between the insane and those for whom the attributes of the Creator but are never conscious. And verse 243 down is a refutation of the Jainism or something. Verse 243 says, some see it as ubiquitous, and for some the person is the mere size of the body. Some see it is as a mere particle, and the wise see it as non-existent. How can what is permanent be harmed, or unharmed be liberated? Liberation is irrelevant for one whose self is permanent. If the self exists, it is inappropriate to think there is no self, and false to claim one attains nirvana through certain knowledge of reality. If it exists as liberation, it should not be non-existent before. It is explained that what is seen without anything is its nature. If the permanent discontinues, how could there be grass at present? If indeed this were true, no one would have ignorance either. And so forth. At the end of the 10th chapter. And then next is 11th chapter is refutation of the truly existing time. The present pot and the past one do not exist in the future pot. Since both would be future, the future would not exist. If a disintegrated thing exists, a future entity in the future, how can what is future in nature become that which is past? Because of being future in nature, a future functional thing is thus present and cannot be future. If the future, past and present exist, what does it exist? How can there be impermanence for one for whom all time exists? And then next verse, 256 is a refutation of the future in particular. If the future is produced, why is it not present? If it is unproduced, is the future permanent or what? If the future is impermanent, because though not produced, it disintegrates, since the past does not disintegrate, why not consider it permanent? If the past and present are not impermanent, the third, which is different from these, is also not. If a thing which will be produced later exists beforehand, the contention of Nyayikas is not erroneous. To say something which will be made to occur already exists and is unreasonable. If that which exists unproduced is produced, what has been produced will rise again. Verse 261 and 262. 264 now. Liberation will occur without exertion. So desire and attachment are mentioned in this verse. Desire refers to the person and is a reference to the person, and then the attachment arising in that person. 265, right? And 266, the transformation of things also is not perceived, even by the mind. And next is refutation of the proof of time existing substantially. Verse number 267. How can there be things with no duration, being impermanent? How can they endure? If they had duration first, they would not grow old in the end. Verse 270. Verse 272, 273, 274, 275, the end of 11th chapter. And now, next chapter, refuting the true existence in the perceiver or the observer, the observed object, sorry. So an unprejudiced, intelligent and interested listener is called a vessel. Neither the teachers nor the students' good quality will be taken as fault. He explained existence and its causes, the means to peace and peace itself. What people do not understand is seen as a subduer's fault. These strange people all agree that by giving up everything one attains nirvana. For what reason do they dislike that which puts an end to all? How will one who does not know the means to give it up do so? Certainly, therefore, the subduer has said there is no peace in any other teaching. Whoever doubts what the Buddha said about that which is hidden should rely on emptiness and gain conviction in him alone. Those who find it hard to see this world are ignorant of others. Those who follow them will be misled for a very long time. Verse 289, His Holiness is reached. Verse 288 says, there is no other door to peace, and it destroys all wrong views. That which is the object of all the Buddhas is called selflessness. Verse 290, 92. For those who think there is in reality no self and abide in this thought, how will existence cause pleasure or non-existence cause fear? Seeing the many fodders who are seeds of futility, who would not feel pity for people who long for teaching? The teachings of the Shakyas, Nirgranthas, and Brahmins are perceived by the mind, the eye, and the ears. Thus, the subduer's teaching is subtle. Brahmin practices are said mainly to be an outward show. The practice of Nigranthas are said to be mainly stultifying. Brahmins are revered because they adopt the orthodox. Nigranthas are pitied because they adopt the diluted. So verse number 300 says that the intelligent who seek what is good, adopt what is worthwhile even from others. So you can't say that this comes from another tradition than oneself, and therefore not take what is good in them. So the intelligent ones actually do not do that, but actually take that which is good from other traditions as well. And then does the sun not belong to all on earth who have sight? And then the next chapter, refuting truly existent sense organs and objects. So when we talk about direct perception, in the Prasangika system, it is said the perception of the direct objects. So the ngonsum or directness is a reference to the object and not the subjective mind, the perceiver. So when seeing its form, the whole pot is not in fact seen. Who that knows reality would claim that the pot is directly perceptible also? By means of this very analysis, those with superior intelligence should refute individually all that is fragrant, sweet, and soft. Because the form is seen, everything is seen. Why? Because of what is not seen, would the form not be unseen? Number code. Number card. Dira. 204 is a refutation of what is observed as being absent of true existence. There is no direct perception of just the form alone, because it has a close and distant as well as a central part. So each chapter in the 400 verses contains 25 stanzas, but there is an extra stanza that is added from the commentary by Gyaltsab in this chapter. So as is said in the Madhyamaka Karika, if seeing were to have any objective existence, independent existence, then the eye would be actually looking at itself. The eye consciousness would be looking at itself. So this explains the verse 315. And then verse 318 is the analysis of sound. If sound makes a noise as it travels, why should it not be a speaker? And so forth. And verse 321, without the sense organs, what will mind do after it has gone? If it were so, why would that which lives not always be without mind? An object already seen is perceived by mind like a mirage. That which posits all phenomena is called the aggregate of recognition. When there is nothing on earth that does not amaze the wise, why think cognition by the senses and such like are amazing. And then the last verse, finished. Chapter 14, refuting extreme conceptions. So, the verse 327 is like similar to the first verse of the 22nd chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika, where it says that the Tathagata, it is neither the aggregates nor separate from it. It is not in them, neither it is, neither they are in it. And what Tathagata is not, does not possess the aggregates, what is Tathagata. So this is similar to that analysis. Verse 327 is, since the two are seen to have dissimilar characteristics, if the pot is separated from existence, why would existence not also be separated from the pot? If one is not accepted as the pot also is not one. Moreover, possession is so with regard to 227, His Holiness was saying this is similar to the five-pointed analysis in this 22nd chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika. Form is a component of the pot, and thus, for a start, is not the pot. Since the compound does not exist, neither do the components. So it was 334, and then 335, and 336, now 337. The pot has no causes and is itself not an effect. Thus, there is no pot at all, apart from form and so forth. And 338, if the pot exists by virtue of its causes, and those causes by virtue of others, how can that which does not exist by virtue of itself produce something disparate? 339, 340, and then 341. 42 finished. 43. So verse 348 says, anything that has dependent arising is not independent. All these are not independent, therefore there is no self. 14th chapter completed. Next is refuting truly existent characteristics such as arising, abiding, and then decay and disintegration. .335 read, 355 read, 356 and 357, 358, 359, 359. A present thing does not come into existence from itself, nor come into existence from the future, and also not from the past. There is no coming of the produced, likewise no going of that which has ceased. And since it is thus, why should existence not be like a magician's illusion? Production, duration, and disintegration do not occur simultaneously. If they are not consecutive either, when can they ever occur? And with regard to the 363, as one of the chapters of Mullah Karika also analyzed in its analysis, says that the definition cannot precede the definiendum and so forth. So this is similar to that. So if that which is characterized is not to be different from its characteristics, how can the characterized be impermanent? Alternatively, existence of all four is unclear. A thing is not produced from a thing, nor is a thing produced from a non-thing. A non-thing is not produced from a non-thing, nor is a thing produced from non-thing. A thing does not become a thing, nor does a non-thing become a thing. A non-thing does not become a non-thing, and nor does a thing become a non-thing. 371, a thing in the process of production is said to be entirely unproduced and rising. Since there is no difference, why should the pot not be considered non-existent? That which is presently being produced, though incomplete, is other than unproduced. Yet also, since other than produced, the unproduced is being produced. That which is presently being produced, though not yet existent, is later said to exist. The unproduced is thus being produced, but the non-existent does not arise. The completed is called existent. The uncompleted is called non-existent. When there is nothing in the process of production, there is being referred, what is being referred to as such. Since without a cause there is no effect, both starting and stopping are not feasible. So that is the end of the chapter 15. Next, refuting remaining counter-arguments. So for various reasons, that which is empty appears nonetheless as if not empty. They are refuted. These are refuted individually by all the chapters. When the author and the subject also exist, it is incorrect to call them empty. Also, with regard to these three, whatever arises in dependence does not exist. If through flaws concerning emptiness, things were established as not empty, why would emptiness not be established through flaws concerning lack of emptiness? In refuting the thesis of others and in proving your own thesis, if on the one hand you like to disprove, why do you not like to prove? When thoroughly investigated the non-existent thesis, then all three, such as oneness, are also not thesis. Where a pot is directly perceptible, the argument of emptiness is meaningless. Here, reasons appearing in textual systems are not acceptable. Elsewhere, they are. When there is nothing that is not empty, how can emptiness be so? When the one does not exist, why should the antidote exist? If there were a thesis, absence of the thesis would in entity be a thesis. But where there is no thesis, what can be the counter thesis? How can fire be hot when things do not exist? This was refuted above. It was said that even hot fire does not exist. This is on verse 396. which says if things are not empty because they are empty by virtue of reasons, the thesis would not be distinct from the reasons. And verse 398, if things exist inherently, what good is it to perceive emptiness? So because of our grasping at some true existence in things, causes us suffering. Therefore, we need to counter this grasping, and therefore emptiness is, understanding of emptiness is necessary. So perceptions by way of conceptions minds, this is refuted here. To say one exists and the other does not is neither reality nor the conventional. Therefore, it cannot be said that this exists and that does not. So, since things do not have any objective essential existence, you need to do away with both the extremes of nihilism and eternalism. Therefore, verse number 400 refers to that. Against one who holds no thesis that things exist, do not or not, or do and do not exist, counter-arguments cannot be raised, no matter how long one tries. So this, there was the 16th chapter completed, and the text mentions the translators and the Pandit, the Indian Pandita who helped. So So this concludes the treatise of the 400 stanzas on the yogic deeds of bodhisattvas written by Master Aryadeva, the spiritual son of the exalted Naga's feet, Nagarjuna, and it was translated. And the meaning settled in the temple of Ratnagupta Vihara in the center of the glorious Kashmiri city of Anupamapura by the Indian abbot Sukshma Jana and Tibetan translator Patsap Nyematak. So His Holiness also read some lines from the commentary by Master Chandrakirti. Because he started the teaching by reading the opening passage of the commentary by Master Chandrakirti. So the Buddha Shakyamuni is like the sun opening the lotus petals as it touches the flower, and so it's like opening the lotus flower of the minds of sentient beings and doing away with the ignorance within us. And so this completes the teaching on the 400 verses at the request of mainly the centers founded by the late Venerable Tenzin Chamchen. And so we also had in the previous times teaching on the commentary on awakening mind, and then also the letter to a friend, and also Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Master Nagarjuna. So you have come a long way. Not you. And you come from afar with, and I've tried to fulfill your aspiration and your wishes. So the important thing is to practice. Are you open? So what's important is to make transformation within ourselves, to develop our wisdom further. So this is your responsibility, not mine. So what I've said is what I could explain, and those that I couldn't, I've left them. Now my job is done, and you are left with your job. So I'm going in the next few days. I'm leaving, going to Europe, and you are going back to your own countries, your home, and you have to carry your own problems with yourself. But it's in your hands to not let your problems overwhelm you, and with the help of your own perception. So with regard to photo session with the Taiwanese group, perhaps I'll keep sitting on the throne, and then you would have to come and sit around. And next is long life puja offering for His Holiness. So you have come here with sincere motivation and pure heart and faith and so forth. And you should also say this prayer for long life for me sincerely. It's called the Song of Immortality, Prayer for the Long Life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. O our gurus and your line of lamas, from whom we have the deepest gratitude, for whom we have the deepest gratitude, you are the repository of the three secrets of the innumerable Buddhas. You miraculously manifest according to each devotee's capacity. To you, who are the wish-fulfilling gems, the source of all virtues and good qualities, we offer our prayers with intense devotion. That Tenzin Gyatso, the protector of the land of snows, may live for 100 eons. Pour on him your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. The Dharma Dhatu, the inexpressible reality which pervades all things like the heavens, immaculate, full of great bliss and transcendent wisdom, manifest like the cloud. The numberless abodes of the higher divinities, the mandalas of the heavenly beings, to all the higher forms of the divine ones, the yidams, we offer our prayers with intense devotion. That Tenzin Gyatso, the protector of the land of snows, may live for 100 eons. Pour on him your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. O you numberless Buddhas of the past, present, and future, who are the masters of the 10 powers, master of 10 powers, and the teachers of the gods, whose attributes are the 10 perfections, free from defilements, and born of realization, are the source of Buddha activity, which appeared for all times in the ocean of suffering in the world for the sake of all sentient beings. We offer our prayers with intense devotion. The Tenzin Gyatso, protector of the land of snow, may live for 100 eons. Pour on him your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. O sacred dharmas of the three yanas, which liberates us from the secret suffering of the three worlds, supremely claim the three jewel treasure of the fully enlightened ones, without impurities, unchanging, eternally good, the peak of virtues, we offer our praise with intense devotion, that ends in Yatso Pradeva land of snow may live for 100 years, pour on him your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. And then the next is the prayer to the Sangha members, who are awakened and solid of the highest valor in conquering the suffering of the wheel of life, with the transcendent wisdom that directly intuits the deeper truth, never departing from the indestructible Vajra, bird of Nirvana. We offer our praise with intense devotion, that ends in Yatsa Prasada land of snow may live for 100 eons, pour on him your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. And then the prayer to the Dakas and Dakinis, heavenly beings of the three worlds, who appear in the highest paradises, the sacred places, the cremation grounds, who have the innumerable experience of bliss and void, supporting the yogis in their meditation on the excellent path. We offer our prayers with intense devotion, that ends in Yatsa Pradeva land of snow may live for 100 years, pour on him your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. To the ocean of guardians of the teachings, who possess the eye of transcendent wisdom, carrying on their matted locks the knot, symbolic of the Vajra, of the vows they have made. They made to the Vajradhara Buddha, the powerful ones who protect the teaching and the upholders of the Dhamma. We offer prayers with the intense devotion, that ends in Yatsa Pradeva land of snow may live for 100 years. Pour on me your blessings, that his aspirations may be fulfilled. To all you guides, the guides in whom we take refuge, an excellent refuge. We pray with the deepest devotion, humbled from the heart, that by the strength of these verses, the only protector of the land of snow, the migrators, he who has power over speech, the kindly one, upholder of the Dhamma, the great ocean who possesses the three sacred powers, may be indestructible, eternal and without end, that seated on the supreme unconquerable throne of the Vajra, he may live for 100 eons. You who bear the burdens of innumerable Buddhas, with courage carrying on your shoulders, that's the vast activities for the full enlightened ones, working for the wealth of all beings. Like the wish-fulfilling gem, the jewel of Lama, may your aspiration may be perfectly fulfilled. By the virtue of this, may the golden era be opened like the gate to the great space, liberating all sentient beings, coming as the happiness of spring, which comforts our sorrows, and help this teaching of the Buddha to spread in all directions and in all ages, making it prosper to the summit of samsara and nirvana. O you with the lotus in your hand, may this nectar stream of your blessings strengthen our minds and bring it to maturity. May we be able to please you by practicing the Dharma, through accomplishing at all times the good deeds of the Bodhisattvas. May we reach Nirvana. By the blessings of the wondrous Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, by the unassailable truth of the spiritual laws of cause and effect, by the unsustained power of the pure mind, may the aims of our prayers soon be accomplished.
Yes,